Hello again, everyone. It's me, Alex, your nerd to the core, and today I'm going to be your Commander Dad. Today I'm going to be talking about one of my mono black decks. It's Crovax the Cursed. Now, this is an old card. It's from 1998, older than some of you that might be watching this. It's old. It doesn't have the right creature type printed on the type line, just a summon legend, even though it says right there, Crovax the Cursed counts as a vampire. So what we have here is a legendary creature vampire that enters the battlefield with 4+1/+1 counters on it. And it says, during your upkeep, sacrifice a creature. Put a +1/+1 counter on Crovax, or remove a +1/+1 counter from Crovax if you don't sacrifice a creature. And you can play black to give him flying. So this card tells a story. And that story is feed him, or he gets weaker. And you can't really see it on the video, but this art is fantastic. It's one of the things that draws me to this card. And I've had a Crovax deck in the past, and I took it apart. And I decided, there are a couple cards that saw print that made me want to put it back together. See, I like to build decks that are layered. They have a lot of things going on that all kind of build towards something. Crovax is one that's absolutely a Voltron deck. I want to make Voltron Crovax big and then punch you in the face with him. But the cards that really spoke to me are these two. First, Animation Module from Kaladesh. This is a 1-mana artifact that says whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are placed on a permanent you control, you may pay a colorless, and if I do, make a 1/1 servo. That's a colorless artifact creature. And then you can pay 3 and tap to choose a counter on target permanent or player and give that permanent or player another counter of that kind. So with Crovax out, if you sacrifice a creature, you put a +1/+1 counter on Crovax, then you can pay 1 to get a 1/1. Which the next turn you can then feed to Crovax, and you kind of have this loop going on. That's just general good fodder. Every so often you can pay 3, put an extra counter on, make another 1/1. All good. This other creature came out in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and it's 2 and a black for a 2/3 creature spirit called Unforgiving One with Menace. And whenever it attacks, return target creature card with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the number of modified creatures you control. So modified creatures are creatures with enchantments, auras, equipment, or +1/+1 counters. And so when I saw these two together, I'm like, wow. This gives me a reason to spread the counters around, to put equipment on Crovax, and to just kind of go to town. So what this became was a mono-black modified deck. But first, we have to talk about feeding Crovax. And that's where I found these. These are all cards that help to feed Crovax while also playing into the +1/+1 counter thing. We have 2 of the walkers, Market-Back Walker and Hanger-Back Walkers. Both of these cost XX. So we have to pay X twice, and for each X, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Market-Back Walker says put a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it dies, you draw a card for each 1/1 counter on it. Hanger-Back Walker says when it dies, you get a 1/1 Flying Thopter artifact creature token for each +1/+1 counter on it. But in order to put more counters on, you pay 1 and tap it. So here, these are good 2-drops. They come down before Crovax. They come down very large after Crovax. But both of them leave you something really important when they die. Dreadhorde Invasion is a pretty bad impression of a Bitter Blossom, but pretty good here. For 1 and a black, it's an enchantment that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and amass 1, which means put a +1/+1 counter on an army I control, and if I don't control an army, create a 0/0 black zombie army creature token first. And whenever a zombie token I control with power 6 or greater attacks against lifelink until end of turn. But what really matters is I'm making a 0/0 count token and putting counters on it, so they're modified. Then we have Retrofitted Transmigrant, a 1 black artifact creature zombie for a 1/1 that says 3 and a black, return it from the graveyard to the battlefield tapped with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So again, something to feed to Crovax, but brings its own counters. And that becomes important when we look at this next piece of cards. These are 2 of the cards in the deck that care about creatures with counters on them. First, we have Nakara Lair Scavenger from the Ikoria Commander. It's a 2/2 for 2 and a black. It has a partner, but that partner is white and green, so we don't care about it here. It's a 2/2 with Menace, and whenever another creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had 1 or more counters on it, you draw a card and lose a life. Well, this pile, full of cards that have counters on them. Yathan Tomb Guard is from Tarkir Dragonstorm for 2 and a black. It's a human warrior, 2/3 with Menace. And whenever a creature you control with a counter on it deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card and lose a life. So what we see here are ways to draw cards from attacking and from creatures dying. Crovax likes to attack. Crovax likes creatures dying. What else do you want? This next pile is about keeping counters around or making Crovax large. We have the Ozolith, which is a legendary artifact from Ikoria. When a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, you put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Ozolith onto target creature. Most of the time, moving them onto Crovax. But you can see, again, creatures die with counters, put them on Crovax. Make Crovax very big. Ring of Zathrid is from M13. It's an artifact equipment, playing into modified again, for 2 colorless. It says 2, regenerate equipped creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature if it's black with an equip of 1. So very early, if I don't have creatures out, Crovax just stays the same size with Ring of Zathrid. And it has built-in protection with Regenerate. When you're building a Voltron deck, you really want ways to protect your commander, and this one works in so many ways. It modifies it, it keeps it growing, and it's really cheap to move around. Finally, we have Blade of the Bloodchief for 1 from colorless from Zendikar, another equipment. Whenever a creature dies, put a +1/+1 counter on equipped creature. If the equipped creature is a vampire, which Crovax is, put 2 of those counters on instead, for a equip of 1. All of these serve to not only make Crovax large, but to also make the other threats, if Crovax is unavailable, large as well. What happens when they get large? Well, you can throw them at your opponent. Rite of Consumption is a sorcery for 1 and a black from Shadowmoor that says, as an additional cost to this card, sacrifice a creature. Rite of Consumption deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to target player. You gain life equal to the damage dealt this way. Great finishing move in Crovax. Over here we have Sure Strike Trident, an equipment from Darksteel for 2 colorless. It says equipped creature has first strike and tap unattached Sure Strike Trident. This creature deals damage equal to its power to target player, but has an equip of 4. But once Crovax gets large enough, Sure Strike Trident just holds a dagger to the table. No one can do anything under threat of having this flung at their face. Great card, great way to use a creature with huge power. What happens when you have all these counters going around? Well, you want to spread them around a little bit. You want to see what else you can do with them. You have Unspeakable Symbol, which is a black enchantment from Scourge for 1 black, pay through life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And you want to be able to spread those counters around because you care about multiple modified creatures, you care about multiple creatures with counters on them. And when you put counters on some of these cards, you get to do some fun things. Newscraft Mob is 4 black from Shadows over Innistrad. And Eldritch Moon, it enters with 5 +1/+1 counters on it, but whenever a player casts a spell, you remove a counter from it, and if you do, you put a 2/2 zombie token into play. Well, you can just pay 3 life to keep this thing going. Fetid Gargantua is from Modern Horizons 3, 4 and a black for a 4/4 horror with Adapt 2 and a black, for 2 and a black. So what you can do is you can pay 2 and a black to put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. But whenever you put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on this card, you may draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. So again, late in the game, if you have extra life hanging around, you can pay 3 life to put another counter on this, draw 2 more cards, lose 2 more life. Similarly, Standoff from Modern Horizons 3 and Constructed is Emperor of Bones. It's a skeleton noble for 1 and a black. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you can exile up to 1 target card from a graveyard with Adapt for 1 and a black for Adapt 2. And just like Fetid Gargantua, when you put +1/+1 counters on Emperor of Bones, you can put a creature card exiled with it onto the battlefield under your control with Finality Counter. Fun fact, Finality Counters count as something being modified. It's a counter. It gains haste and you sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. So you got to watch out with this because Finality Counters will end up on the Ozolith, which is not something you want. But thankfully, we have ways to play with counters. Fane the Broker is one of those cards that I've been trying to fit into decks forever. For 2 and a black, you have a Human Warlock, 3/3, and this is from the Strixhaven Commander. You can tap it to sacrifice a creature, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature. You can tap it to remove a counter, not necessarily a +1/+1 counter, any counter from a creature to create a treasure coat token. And you can tap it to sacrifice an artifact to create a 2/1 white and black Inkling creature token with flying, and you can pay 3 and a black to untap Fane. Really what he's here for is to remove finality counters and to put counters on creatures. But if you ever want to just sacrifice a treasure to turn it into an Inkling, that's great. Charnel Serenade's another one of those cards I've been trying to fit into a deck forever. For 4 black from Murders at Karlov Manor commander, it's a sorcery with Surveil 3, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it, and exile Charnel Serenade with 3 time counters on it. But has suspend of 2 and a black, and suspend 3. So what you can basically do is you can keep rebuying creatures with putting finality counters on them, but with Feign or some other cards in the deck out, you can remove those counters and do it over and over again. This is great on 3, it's great on 6, and it's great for bringing back creatures that you don't need to keep around. Finally, one of my favorite cards to mess with +1/+1 counters is Retribution of the Ancients. It's an enchantment from Khans Tarkir for black, and it says black, remove X +1/+1 counters from amongst creatures you control. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. When you have creatures with +1/+1 counters everywhere, whether they're zombie army tokens, whether they're retrofitted transmogrants, this can pull counters off of them, and it can use those counters to then destroy other creatures. Great use of +1/+1 counters. Now, Alex, you might be asking yourself, why go through all the work of building a mono black +1/+1 counter deck when you can just build one with 2 colors instead, maybe black-green, maybe white-black, or white-black-green? And for me, it's all about the puzzle. Crovax is a puzzle. He doesn't tell you what to do. He makes you solve for making him good. And for me, that's part of the fun of Commander. Trying to figure out how to make a card work, getting it to work in different game states with all sorts of cards that aren't really meant to go together. But all of these cards from basically 4 decades of the game help make Crovax really a fun deck to play. If you're looking for something a little different, something a little offbeat, try looking at cards that aren't perfect for what you're trying to do, but ask you a question. How are you going to do it? Because you know what? As my dad always said, trying hard stuff builds character. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.